Yeah.
Aaron, I love the description and how you laid it out for the breaking bread. Because, I mean, when I think freedom of speech, I think of the Constitution and that side of it, which is very broad. It's not there to make you feel comfortable. It's that of the founders saying, we actually know this is going to cause a lot of problems. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion. They didn't love that. Why did they do it? Because they had to, because they had a lot of people of a lot of different religions trying to get a document together, and there was enough people saying, I don't want to be in the minority where someone can oppress me. That's what the Constitution came out of. They knew it was going to cause people to have, but they didn't want the government to come in and restrict that speech. And that's one part of it is the Constitution is about the government. It's about the government's restriction on speech. Then you get to freedom of speech where we're having a conversation in the private market. I can say whatever I want. My employer might not like it very much, and I work in communications, and I work for an employer, and if I say something that is really going to harm their reputation, they kind of have a right to say we don't want to be associated with you anymore. That is also the freedom for an organization. And someone else on the panel can say, I think what you said is idiotic. That's their freedom of speech. And so there's kind of what gets regulated in the private market and among different people. But I love how the Breaking Bread put it where I think we got to get back to as a society is not assuming the worst in what people, especially people on the other side of the political spectrum, say. They might truly be racist, a bigot, an idiot, somebody we don't want to ever spend any time with. But let's let them prove that and get there. Let's not make the assumption right away. I come from a big, loud family that argues and fights and then goes back to talking about sports and kids
that's
and things
love.
like that. And that's just kind of how I was raised. And it's of course easier if you probably have those conversations more. People tend to have those conversations with their friends because they know their friend has a heart in the right place, even if they don't articulate something exactly correct that today can get you canceled when 3 years ago it would have been totally in the norm.
Yeah. Thank you. You were going to say something?
I just think of James, one of the writers of in the New Testament. He says this: when we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships as an example. Although they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and it is itself set on fire by hell. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. It's like, whoa, like that.
Yeah.
And so it's like freedom of speech is not like this, it's like this hallowed thing. I mean, we really, it goes back to, I remember a conversation about gun ownership. It's responsible speech. Just because I have the ability to say something doesn't mean I should. Just because I want to say it doesn't mean I should. And we really need to, one of the Martin Luther, one of the reformers of the church, he's the eighth commandment, depending on how you number the commandments, is he always ends, and it always grabs my attention. He says, put the best construction on everything. I'm like, on everything? Even if they don't deserve it, yes, on everything. Just really assume the best of that other person. And just love them, seek to love them as your neighbor.
Yeah, this is good. I really appreciate this because this topic is so nuanced, right? Because what may offend one person may not the other, right? Somebody may be coming in good intention, right? And it still can get misconstrued. And it's so difficult when you're dealing with people. Humans, right? And how to communicate, how to effectively communicate with the best intentions. And one thing I always think about, because I agree with you all in regards to making sure that you use the speech and our tongues responsibly, right? And I always always try to let people know, if you try to silence one group, your group could be coming next, right? So I always try to think about that when I think about, canceling someone or being super highly offended by something in regard, does this person impact my life? Like, will I ever see them again? Do I have to ever come in contact with them again? And then also, if I am silencing this group, right, then my group can always be up next. And so I try to watch that and be open to conversation, right? People may say something that is dumb to me, right? Like, why would you say that? Why would you do that? When you know that people look up jobs now and call employers and try to get you fired for saying something that they don't agree with. But I also say, wow, I'm glad they felt comfortable to say it. Like, let's talk about this. Why do you feel like that? Let's dig a little bit deeper, so then people sometimes watch what they say to me because I want to know, well, why do you feel like that? Let's talk about this more. So, I think that's really hard to gauge, right? What we should say. Did you want to say something, Mike?
One little thing.
No, please.
As a queer person, kind of coming into the conversation, I think about hate speech a lot.
Sure.
Hate speech is protected speech, and I think sometimes that's overlooked. Threatening, true threats are not, but hate speech is. And then the thing that I kind of think about is who really defines that. Who gets to choose what that means? And oftentimes, like you mentioned, things can be turned on their head, and you can have the most marginalized group being penalized for saying things.
Sure.
And so one thing I always try to think about is, there are other nations in which if you say something that is perceived as homophobic online, you can be arrested or fined. That is happening. And in America, because of the First Amendment, that doesn't happen here, and it hopefully won't happen here. And it seems strange. I think back to the older ACLU and the right of Nazis to march in Skokie. That was such a strong example of really countering or being able to counter something hateful with real human resilience and power, and not necessarily relying on the law to prematurely shut that down, because I can just see stuff festering, right? If we don't actually confront them as people to people. So it's a topic, just because of my identity, so to speak, I think about a fair bit. I think the ACLU has kind of dropped the ball on a lot of this lately, but there is an organization called FIRE, the Foundation for
Individual Rights and well, now they changed. It was Foundation for Individual Rights and Education.
Now Expression, right?
Expression, yeah.
Expression instead of education, okay.
And they started on college campuses, really trying to make sure that they were true to their standards and values of places of open dialogue. But now they've expanded to address things, throughout public life and government in the U.S. So I recommend checking them out. They're nonpartisan, so you probably will be equally upset at them, no matter how you view things. But that's the nature of it. When you hold true to principles, it shouldn't matter whose name is in the blank. The ethic is the ethic. So I really respect that organization for holding that line, and it really implores us, as people to, really interpersonally confront those things to have a stronger nation, and to not rely on policing each other. Policing each other is I don't want to live in that future.
No.
I do want to say, FIRE at one point had federal lawsuits representing Christian groups, an atheist group, a Jewish group, and a Palestinian student group all at the same time. So they're quite across the spectrum.
No, I love that, right? And I don't know. And I don't know, everybody does not always agree with this, but I think there is also some personal responsibility in what you receive, right? I've had people call me the N-word, and then they add other colorful things with it, different names, and it doesn't bother me because I don't feel like I am, right? So I think that, and I'm not trying to dismiss anybody's feelings of when names are called against you or things that people say, but I think also as individuals we have to take some kind of responsibility in what we absorb, right? And who we receive it from, right? Because people are going to always say something, right? People are going to always say crazy things, and they say it intentionally to get under your skin, right? So if someone calls, with my example, if someone calls me the N-word, they want me to be upset by that, right? And so I refuse to give them that power. And so, or I remember when I first moved to Midland, I had people say, go back to Africa. And I'm like, give me a ticket, pay for it, and it's like, people say things to us to sometimes get a rise. So I think that also as individuals, we have to take some kind of responsibility in how we receive things, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Okay. But again, it does not give people the right to just say anything, but people are going to always be people. And if everything, so that's that. So, okay.
I think it's a real balance, and we can't forget the resilience part of the equation. Because I look at youth today, and sometimes I'm like, we're forgetting that part a little bit. Even though like I will be the first to condemn, something hateful. But I think it's also important for us to cultivate exactly what you described. I've had to do that in my life.
I'm sorry. I know we're prolonging this.
No.
I have not had a personal experience like you talked about. I've got 4 kids, and one of my daughters, she's just turned 10. She's quite sensitive.
Yeah.
My son, who is in here somewhere, he was getting books.
Hi, son.
He's 12, and it's like, how was school? Good.
Yeah.
Didn't you go to the amusement park for a field trip? Oh, yeah, it was good.
Yeah. That's my
Or
oldest
we
son.
did tests all day long. It's good.
Yeah.
There's no difference. Every day is the same. You couldn't draw conversation out of him. My daughter, every day, this girl talked about this at school, and then it's just like she's very sensitive over these perceived slights sometimes.
Yeah.
And I thought about that of like, how do you deal with empathy? My wife's better at that. Versus like also, this is just going to negatively affect you, even if there is something really real there. And she was, I'm not comparing her situation to what you guys are talking about. But to that point of it can only harm you if you dwell on. They're over it. They're on to the next person.
They're living
being
their
an
life.
idiot to someone else.
It's true.
But if you are that and you take in those comments to only set yourself back, you're harming yourself. You're kind of doing what the person intended. So it is a tough thing for how much we talk about preventing bullying and preventing these problems in school while also teaching the actual real resilience for people and for kids, because they're going to have to do it their whole life. They're going to have to do it, so we got to teach it
People are
sometime.
going to always be people. Yeah. And we're going to go. Let's go. But in 2020, 2021, I was doing a lot of interviews when we had all the stuff in the pandemic, and during that time it was all like riots going on. It was like just all kind of stuff going on all over the nation. And I reached out to a couple people to talk to a couple people in some of these white nationalist groups, right? Because I truly want to understand, how do you hate a whole group of people that you've never met, right? I was really curious about that because I wasn't raised that way. And so I had to, kind of have conversations about that, right? And had to go into this lion's den, so to speak, with people that I know did not necessarily like me. And we ended up having really good conversations, and actually very transparent conversations. And again, everybody can't do that and everybody shouldn't do that, right? But I felt like I had to kind of move past who they thought I was, right? And who I thought they were, right? And to have real dialogue to better understand, not become best friends, but to understand, to be able to have conversations. So sometimes, depending on what your goal is, you do have to understand that people are going to be people. And if you don't understand that, then you're going to always be a little hurt, right? Because you'll always be let down because you expect better out of people. It's like, well, people are going to be people. So anyway, let's get to the audience and ask them if you all have any questions or any comments. Don't all raise your hand at once. Yeah, you have a question. Make sure you get back there.
I know I said this in one of the last shows. Thank you for ending this on an easy to talk about note. If you're going to say something that's going to hurt somebody's feelings when it comes to freedom of speech, is it going to have a positive effect? Mm-hmm. I quite literally live by this rule. What I'm going to say is going to hurt you, the second question is it going to have a positive effect? And if not, then why say it? Why hurt someone's feelings for an unnecessary reason? And I just recently had an experience at work. I've had my job for 11 years, and I've never once had a bad complaint to my knowledge. And this family was really difficult for me to work with. And about an hour into my arrangements, the one daughter looked at me and she said, "I got to just tell you that your face brought us so much disgust, and it came with a bad connotation."
Oh, wow.
I immediately cried. I had dealt with a couple really tough and emotional cases. It was a really bad week at that, and I've been contemplating my career, and I just looked at her and bawled because I care so deeply about what I do, and I pull these people into my heart, and it's a tough time in their life. And my first thought was, who says that to somebody? Freedom of speech. You can say what you want, that's fine. But how do I react to that? I'm not responsible for what people say. I'm not responsible for what happens, but I am responsible for the outcome and how I react to that situation. Let's get down to the bottom of it. What happened? I'm sorry. You made an error at one point last year when we used your services. You printed an error. You had it corrected before the public came in, but we'll never forget it. Never mind all the good work I did. Never mind that the biggest part of my job was completed with absolute success. One small error. And now I realize how important it is to proofread my work. Yeah, it's really important, but I just looked at her. I didn't know what else to say, and I said, thank you for being honest. Thank you for getting that off of your chest, and thank you for telling me where we stand. I'm sorry for what I did, but you have now made me aware to be twice as careful with what I do. So I think just an important message is, if what you're going to say is going to hurt somebody, is there a reason behind it? We hugged it out. We cried together. I apologized, and everything is good. We just communicated the issue and got it off the table. Could have been done differently, but there was an effect to it, I guess, and I preach honesty.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question in regards to that? Because I know people don't know this, but you work at a funeral home, right? Was this person, and I'm just asking in my mind as I'm thinking about what you said, was this person a family you were working with that was going through a hard time? And not making excuses, of course, at all. Or was this like a colleague or someone?
Yeah, this was a family, so that's a really important thing to talk about. Like, yeah, I'm a mortician who runs 2 funeral homes. I was trying to avoid that, but that's okay.
Oh, you were? You talk about it all the time.
Not on purpose, but I deal with families the day after they lose their loved one. It's the hardest day of their life, and I became a funeral director because I lost 13 people in 9 months that were really close to me. And I just went through another 12 last year. So I know death. I know what it's like to sit on that side of that table, and I just wanted to be the right person for them. So I deal with people through the anger stage.
Sure.
And I am constantly having to pull myself out and reflect back and say, they're going through hell right now. And sometimes I'm grieving too, and they don't know that, and I have to just cover my face and act like they're the only ones here that matter. So what had happened was I'd prepared their dad, I'd planned their funeral, I had done everything, it was flawless. They couldn't believe how many years I took off his life and how healthy he looked. But I put the wrong birthday on his printing material, and a granddaughter found it, and I had it reprinted, all 300 replaced before the wife found out and before any other person found out except for my boss. That was enough for them to say I brought them disgust.
I'm sorry that happened to you. Yeah, I just thought, and again, not making excuses for the person or acting like that at all. I hope that didn't come across that way. But I thought that to give it some context that the person may not have been trying to be malicious, right? And because when you said when we talk about not being intentional with what, if we know we're going to hurt someone, sometimes you don't know, right? And in that case, it's different. Like sometimes I know I've said things to people and it's like, well, I never knew that would have hurt you. I remember there was a young lady years ago that was kind of super thin, right? And like, my culture, we would always say, Grandma, put some meat on your bones. That was always the thing, right? You need some meat on your bones. We always say that. Get you some food, and and that was like almost like a way of kind of being endearing, right? And I remember she said to me, it's probably about like 15 years ago, and said, that really hurts my feelings because I try to gain weight and I can't gain weight. I was devastated. I was mortified because I'm like, I would never try to intentionally hurt her. I was kind of jesting with her and trying to show love. And when she told me that, of course, I immediately stopped. I've never said it again to anybody else. But I just remember that was not my intention, but I still caused harm. And I was able to acknowledge that and remedy that. But, so anyway.
That's also important. The remedy.
Yeah.
That's how we grow.
Yeah.
That communication when something hurts.
Yes. Thanks for sharing that. Anybody else? Yeah.
I just have a simple question. This came up in a discussion I was in recently. So if you're having your freedom of speech and you're talking about something that's important to you and you're passionate, is your intent greater than the impact? Or is the impact of your words more important than what your intent was? Because ultimately that's what the impact, what you're doing to somebody with your words. Yeah, you got it out. Your intent might have been okay, but isn't your impact more important than your intent?
Anybody want to answer that? Is the impact greater than, which one?
Impact greater
Than the intent?
I was thinking it's interesting to hear
Thank you.
like impact versus intent.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
why is it either or? Like, impact and intent, like, it's important to look at both. I think there's that mutual responsibility to learn together. If I feel really upset about something, maybe I've misinterpreted something, and I can grow as a person by understanding that context. And on the other end, if I'm seeing that something's a constant trigger for somebody, I should stop doing that.
Sure.
So there really is an exchange, and I think in our free speech discussions, I think for a long time, because of like some free speech absolutism, we kind of got into maybe neglecting the impact, and maybe there's been an overcorrection where we've kind of pitted them against each other. But I think one approach that I really like taking is what's called calling people into conversation. It's a thought that Loretta Ross developed, and she has a long history in civil rights and reproductive rights. But instead of creating a confrontational situation where you're calling people out and debating this impact versus intent, call people in with questions. I don't quite understand that. Could you explain some more? Tell me more about what you meant. Giving somebody a chance to clarify. And it creates this atmosphere for real mutual learning where intent and impact are both important. So that's how I talk about it with also a lot of young people, young leaders who I think can really benefit from being empowered to really have these conversations with each other for mutual learning.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Anybody else want to add to that? Go to the next question, if not. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I've just been thinking about, like Jesus says, you've heard it was said, you should not murder. And most of us be like, yeah, I'm good on that one. But I say to you, he says, you should be angry with your brother or sister. You can't, if you say, you fool, you'll be in danger of the fire of hell. That's what he goes like this all the way, hyperbole, And yeah, intent, what is my intent with my words? That's a great question, as the saying goes, search your heart.
Yeah.
Search your heart. What's going on in there? You really need to say these things, and that's the rule of communication. It's not what you meant to say; it's what was received, and that's what matters. And we really need to. And if we did truly, like you said, Aaron, like you didn't intend to hurt this friend of yours by any stretch of the imagination, but when it did come across as hurtful, you turned around and said, "I am so deeply sorry. I did not mean to do that, and now I know more. Thank you for sharing that."
Yeah. And then if I continue to do it, then I'm the problem.
Right, yeah.
Right? I mean, I'm the problem, and so I can own up to that. So, yes, thank you. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Oh, hey, Mo.
I actually had a two-part comment on the whole gun control thing. First I'll tell a quick story. Years ago, I was living in Detroit, and we had a blackout for 3 days. Day one of the blackout, I'm coming on the porch having coffee. I see 8 people walking up with a sledgehammer, busting into the side of a local store, and then they flooded in like World War Z, cleared the place out. People sitting on the block, oh, I can't believe it, I can't believe it. Day two, a couple people in our neighborhood got shot, and other folks who talked against guns all the time, suddenly they wanted to circle the wagons and come spend time with the people who did have guns. And all the time I'm thinking like, okay, this is 3 days. What if this extends to a week, 2 weeks? A lot of people don't have a pantry. So if Walmart's not selling food past a week or something, the people who didn't prepare, they're going to get desperate. And that's a whole different situation. When you're not able to protect yourself, it's a whole different deal. People lost all the opinions against it, once it was that type of situation. And another thing dealing with the whole universal background checks and all that, the problem with these laws is they add a lot of stuff in. Just like with the background check, they wanted to add registries. And some people who look at the history of registries with other countries, registries was like the prerequisite for mass confiscation of weapons. So people don't trust that when they see the history of it. And then we have laws on the books, even here in Michigan now, where you can be mad at your ex and say they're dangerous or something. They come take all their weapons and their ability to, to protect themselves. So You know, I don't think people look at the whole deal. If they pass a law tomorrow where all the law-abiding citizens have to give up their weapons, there's going to be parties in the street.
Yeah, yeah.